Hi, everybody. So today I will be talking about celiac disease. So when you eat at a restaurant, you may notice vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, or other dietary options. Have you ever looked at the fine print on those gluten-free options? Maybe the fine print at the bottom of the menu, as I have shown here. You may be familiar if you have dietary restrictions. I did not look closely at this until my cousin was diagnosed with celiac disease. Then I really started to pay attention. As you can see in some of these local examples, for example, True Food Kitchen, Buffalo Wild Wings, Original Pancake House, and Puesto, the gluten-free label on some of those food items does not actually mean what it should for people with celiac disease. Gluten contamination is everywhere. And in this speech, I would like to help you understand what celiac disease is, if you don't already, focusing on the presence and contaminative nature of gluten in our everyday lives and just how serious the resulting damage that exposure to gluten does to those with the disease. So I'm sure we all can recall a time where food just didn't sit well. Maybe we even had food poisoning. Now, imagine you experience this pain after most meals, but you can't figure out why. This is the reality for many of those with undiagnosed celiac disease. Now, consider finally being diagnosed and thinking you have control over your body once again, but you continue to experience gluten exposure and pain, even when you've attempted to cut gluten out entirely. It can be very difficult to reliably stay away from gluten contamination, and it's seemingly an uphill battle for many of those with celiac disease. So today I'm going to be talking to you about what celiac disease is, how exposure to gluten occurs, and what happens to the body after that exposure. So first, to understand celiac disease, we have to start with defining gluten. So according to Food Chemistry in 2015, which is an academic journal, they defined gluten as a storage protein, and it can be found primarily in wheat, but also in rye and barley. And wheat is a very present item in a lot of the food that we eat. Now, celiac disease is an intolerance to ingesting that gluten. So the New England Journal of Medicine in 2007 explained this as their body is initiating an inflammatory response where antibodies are actually attacking and destroying parts of the gastrointestinal tract. And this causes an array of immediate symptoms and long-term effects. So now that we've kind of gone over the basics of celiac disease, let's dive into how exposure can occur. So first and foremost, exposure can occur by eating foods that contain gluten, but how much gluten? According to the National Celiac Association, even 1/350th of a slice of bread is enough to irritate that inflammation I spoke about previously. So you can see here, I've got a slice of bread. That tiny white sliver is the 1/350th fraction of a slice of bread that is enough to do damage. So it's very easy to happen. And another way that you can be exposed to gluten is through contamination of gluten-containing foods to non-gluten containing foods. So how does that happen? The Journal of Food Protection in 2014 defined contamination very simply as any cross-contact with gluten-containing foods. So you can imagine that this happens very easily, maybe in the food production line in the factory or at the restaurant when they're preparing your food. And in that same study, they actually analyzed gluten-free labeled foods and found that 20.5% of those foods labeled as gluten-free actually contained enough gluten to cause a reaction. And these are foods that are labeled as safe to eat for people with celiac disease. So it can be quite scary. And why is this so important to have reliable gluten-free sources? Well, according to the New England Journal of Medicine, again, in 2007, a gluten-free diet is the only known treatment for celiac disease. There's not medication or anything you can do except completely eliminate gluten from your diet at all times. So knowing how easily this gluten exposure can occur, let's now turn to understanding how that exposure impacts the body in those with celiac disease. So again, referencing the Journal of Food Protection, they explained the immediate effects of gluten exposure on the body. So about 2 to 3 hours after that exposure, one with the disease might experience abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, vomiting, nausea, bloating, and that's just to name a few of the most common symptoms. Now, looking long term, the Journal of Clinical Investigation in 2007, they explain how your small intestine is affected. So here you can see on the left what a normal small intestine should look like with someone without celiac disease or a healthy small intestine with celiac disease. And those finger-like projections that are coming off of the wall of the small intestine are called villi. And those villi increase the surface area of the small intestine, allowing for nutrients to be absorbed in the food that is passing through your body. And with continued exposure to gluten for those with celiac disease, your small intestine will look more like it does on the right here. So those villi are almost completely non-existent, and your small intestine is quite flat with much less surface area. Now, naturally, you're not able to absorb as much nutrients from the food that you're eating. And according to the Mayo Clinic, continued untreated celiac disease can lead to complications like malnutrition, but also bone weakening, infertility, miscarriage, and nervous system problems, and even cancer. So I hope, well, today I aim to further your understanding of what celiac disease is, how it occurs, and why avoiding gluten is so vital for those with the disease. And my hope is that you can really empathize with those who have celiac, notice the ways in which the world is inaccessible to those with the disease, and maybe one day those with celiac disease won't feel so isolated in the food world. Thank you.